Work session, I'll call it to order. That's June 1st, 2021. And I guess we'll turn it over to the manager, and he will head this up probably, I guess, is the best way.
I will do my best. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, see, at our last regular meeting, I presented to you guys the budget message, which, well, I think CD's got about 2,300 accounts in our general ledger system, and that's taking 2,300 accounts and filtering it out and coming out with an end product that will eventually result in a budget ordinance. And the budget ordinance, of course, is made up of the things we decide on and after a public hearing. And the ordinance is going to look more like the ordained and the herebys and those type words. But as a prerequisite to the budget ordinance that we'll take up at our next meeting is the information that I need to calculate and put into that ordinance. And much of that is highlighted in this budget message. In years past, I keep in mind I'm new to Montgomery County, so I've approached this budget season as budgeting 101. Went back and pulled out some of my old textbooks just to make sure I was up to speed on things. But I've tried to lay out our budget message as an introduction for myself and for anyone else, exactly what these funds do, where does our money come from, where does it go. So I don't have any specific presentation. I thought I would go through and hit some highlights, explain some additional information, and then maybe open it up to questions on what's presented, and we can get down into maybe some of the nuts and bolts of some of the questions you guys may have. And I'm going to keep my part fairly brief because I've tried to lay it out in the budget message and try not to repeat what's already in there. But if you have that message open, I want to take you to our revenue section for our primary government services fund. Some folks refer to this as the general fund, but CD, as he'll explain it, our general fund is the culmination of multiple funds, but the primary government services fund is where most of the action on the county level takes place and what draws the most concern. That's where your taxes are levied, tax rates are established. Most, well, in Montgomery County, most all of our services, excluding water and sewer, originate in the primary government services fund. But I wanted to point out a chart that I put in there under the revenue section on page 6. And I realize this might be a lot of information intermingled there, and it might be somewhat confusing, but I wanted to explain that chart a little more in detail. So what this shows is the last 5 or 6 years, well, next year and the previous 5 years, on our return on investment. So this is the money the county has sitting in the bank that we invest and we draw some interest on, and we take that money and put back into our annual operating budget in some form or fashion for operations. So next year, we are experiencing really, really low returns on our investments. So one of the things that we, as budget crafters in the years past, have looked at is what is the equivalent of those returns to our, what's the equivalency of those returns to our tax rate? So a couple years ago in 2019, we, the county collected over $600,000 in investment returns. That's equal to almost 2 cents on the tax rate. So next year, we're not anticipating much in the way of returns. So not even enough to calculate a ratio in my book. But I say all this to say, compared to 2 years ago, we're making up 2 cents on our tax rate just by the loss of investment income. So throughout this budget, remember, we made up 2 cents somewhere along the way, or almost 2 cents over 2 years ago, and a penny from last year, roughly. So that's a source of revenue that we are not seeing for next year. Maybe interest rates go up a little bit. CD, I'm not anticipating they go up much. And the county is limited into where we can invest our monies.
Is that what happened? Just the interest rate declined drastically that much?
So we're limited to mostly some sort of deposit type account. There's a few little exceptions there, but, you know, number one, we want safety of our public funds. And we want liquidity. And then the third priority would be yield. So yield is important, but that safety and liquidity, you know, that's more important than the yield. But the yield does affect our annual operating budget. So I wanted to point that out. I know that graph can get somewhat confusing, but that's something very, very particular. Part of our tax levy, our 61.5 cents, 5 cents of that levy is dedicated to education. That pattern of investment in education continues with this budget as well, and I call that out as well on page 6. I'll briefly mention sales taxes. That was an item of concern a year ago for local governments with the pandemic upon us. How are our sales tax receipts going to look? Local governments in North Carolina were pleasantly surprised that our sales tax receipts were favorable, so that gave me some room to work with in the coming year. So sales tax receipts look like they're improved, barring some sort of setback to the general economy. Does anybody have any questions about our revenues and the primary government services fund? This is mostly your property tax levy and your sales taxes. That takes up most of it.
The only question I have is your bullet on here about Cube Yadkin. Do we know when that determination will be about their appeal?
No, I do not. I wish I did, because that is one part of the crystal ball that's foggy. So that can have an impact. I want to say that would be about $250,000 a year for the county.
Impact,
and
yeah.
that would be impact to the school funds and even one of our fire departments.
Yes, okay.
So it is a concern based on the assessment I received from appraisers and based on their experience that our appraisal looks to be fair.
Okay.
And in fact, one may make an argument that it's based on recent performance, may be a little low. But when that goes to the Property Tax Commission, I don't know. I would imagine there's probably going to be a period where they're going to see if, you know, the county and Cube could settle on some amount. But we feel we have a sound valuation, and we're going to defend it.
Perfect.
The investment money you're talking about, what were we in that we were getting so much money? I mean, I know the interest rates were real low, so we had to be in some money markets, I guess.
So we were mostly in the capital management trust, I'm guessing. And the interest rates were just, my previous employer, we were also invested there. And at one time, a couple of years ago, they were paying better rates than local deposit accounts. Now, no one, locally or not, is paying anything on government funds. Some banks don't even like to invest government funds because there's a collateralization requirement greater for government funding than regular private deposits. But it's mostly in the Capital Management Trust, which is, I believe, out of Charlotte mostly, and local governments from around the state participate in that trust. The interest rate is, what is it now? Nothing. It's,
The other thing, I guess, was the money that we were looking at, that 5.2 million, wasn't it, for the?
yeah.
Does that say that we have to spend that when we get it, or? My thought was,
The
maybe we invest that.
Yeah.
We say that we're gonna do something over a period of years.
Yeah,
and
the goalposts have moved some, and I expect them to move some more with that funding. That's why it's not included
Right.
in here. What you can spend it on, when you're gonna get it, and some hoops you have to jump through to make sure you do get it. I would be willing to bet there's a provision that's not gonna let us sit on it very long.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to figure out an expenditure for it and detail that, and if there's some delay, we'll probably have to do some explaining.
Just say I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't read that in fine print.
And then have to pay that back, yeah.
Pay it back, no.
Yeah.
No.
But we're not going to be arguing over much return anyway. If we
Right.
can't spend it in the timely fashion, we're talking pennies and not dollars. So, in keeping with our revenue estimates, you have expenditures in the primary government services fund, and this is where most of the action takes place, let's just be honest. And for Montgomery County and all counties, we divide those expenditures up in our financial statements into functions. And that's a little harder to read, but I did divide them up into functions, and then also on page 11, I further broke those out into departments. Now, I will start off and say that my budgeting philosophy is slightly different than the previous budget. So I did not do a lot of comparisons on a department level, really a function level, because I handle it slightly different, allocate things across departments differently. So it would not have been a fair comparison. So any comparisons I would encourage you to do on the fund level. And that's what I've tried to stick to in here. But as far as expenditures go, public safety is one that often catches the eye of the general public. And I believe public safety funding is increased. But I don't have that chart. Well, again, it may not be a fair comparison. So, but public safety is your sheriff's department, rescue squad, animal control is public safety. Our contract with First Health is in your public safety function. And I point out public safety for that very reason. Our contract for EMS services with First Health is due, I want to say September.
So this
So-
number that's in here, is this the new
That's-
contract or is that the old?
That's the new.
And how does that compare to what the old?
So their original request was a 5% increase, and we were able to come back off of that just a little bit. But they're proposing a 3-year agreement, and this budget would be able to handle the first year. But their agreement is proposing, I believe it's a 6% increase in the next 2 years. So, but the budget in front of us would get us the first year. We can take that agreement up, well, June, July, if we want to. I have spoken with folks at First Health, and we did negotiate some, and we're able to bring the costs down from the initial proposal. But we're still looking at that growth of 5 to 6% in subsequent years. But the agreement will come before the commissioners in the next month or so. But first things first, getting the funding in place so that we can legally approve the agreement.
I'm surprised they didn't do their little presentation before this. I mean,
Yeah.
you would have thought they would have laid it on us before.
Yeah.
We're already set in September. I mean,
We will have our budget in place, and we'll have enough to cover what they're asking for. If we're able to negotiate more favorably, it will be to our benefit, but at least I wanted to make sure I had enough to cover the service without a reduction in service level in the budget document.
so we can do a 1-year contract, or
We could, if that's what the terms are negotiable. The price is what I'm concerned about at this point, making sure that I've prepared the county's finances to handle worst-case scenario, which would be the price that I'm listing here. But next year is a concern, and that's a concern I voiced as well to First Health, that, growing at a 5 to 6% pace, that's outpacing, our growth in revenue.
Right.
So
Yeah.
eventually, something's going to have to give. Either another service we provide, or the service they provide through the reduction of service.
Yeah.
And with more traffic, more housing being built here, more folks, visiting on the weekends, over 1 million folks, that call Montgomery County a tourist destination. It's really hard to cut back on an emergency service, and I would hate to do that. So,
Well, I think when it's time for us to look at that, it would be nice to understand why they're increased, right? Why are they, what is it that's their cost
yeah.
is going up that much? Why are we seeing such that level of?
Some of the same things that are hitting us at large in our budgets, personnel costs, to maintain competitiveness, equipment, to replace some of the trucks and things like that. I didn't get into the very, very fine details, but in a good faith couple conversations, we were able to get into some of the nuts and bolts that supported their increase, and I can appreciate. I could increase our budget 5 or 6%, but that would outpace our revenues. So the long term is more of a concern to me than the coming year. And I did voice that to our friends at First Health, but they have thus far met in good faith, provided information that we've asked for. So I look forward to further conversation, and thus far they've been great to work with. So.
Yeah, I think we looked at, a couple of years back, we looked at privatizing it back to us at one time. Didn't we, CD? Do you remember any of that? That we looked at trying to maybe take it back over because of the, I guess, the escalating cost? You don't remember any of that?
We did do that.
But it's kind of hard to play when you're the only one in town, and
Yeah,
kind of got you. That's why I think everyone needs to look at the fire service and what a benefit that is, that you have volunteers that's not paid, and
yeah.
you get that service kind of for free. Look, it's not free, but
Right.
when you start looking at something like this, it's free.
The fire service model is a great value to us here in Montgomery
Yes.
County.
Yes.
I can tell you from experience, it's going to cost you about $500,000 per station for a full staff
Yeah.
station,
Yeah.
and we have 10 stations.
Mhm.
That's a major expense.
It's a major expense. All right, so I know obviously we'll go into the EMS stuff a little more in detail later months, so, yeah, because we'll have to.
Yeah. And rescue is supported with I've honored their request for the replacement of one of their, I believe it's a 1989 truck that they have. So it's a 31, 32-year-old truck. So there's a replacement of that truck included in the proposed budget under public safety. I believe that's about $79,000 truck. And there's the replacement schedule for the sheriff's office cars, and some of the a small radio purchase that was mentioned in our very, very first budget meeting, as we're trying to get ahead of was it 2024 or 2025?
Obsolete.
Yeah, when they become obsolete. Does anyone have any questions about any of our expenditures that you want me to expand upon? Now, again, of course, CD to join us, and he can probably go into much greater detail than I can. I know when you get into some of your human services functions that there's a lot of moving parts. Tried to outline those on page 7 to the right of those programs. I'll do my best to try to explain those, but again, there are many, many moving parts to those services.
I do have just, so 2 things. One, the economic development position.
Yep.
So that is we are definitely, yes, moving forward with that. That'll be added to the org chart.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so we're creating that.
That's my proposal. I've tried to do my best
Yeah.
in the first few months with supporting economic development initiatives. I've been out to meet some folks, talked with some folks with the Southeast Partnership and some counterparts with the state. Economic development from outside looking in is one of the things that I see that we could improve on. In fact, I believe we're the only county in the Southeast region that doesn't currently have an economic development person.
Yes, so I think that's a need.
I
I do.
I think economic development will serve us well, particularly in the long term. Now, with economic development, there's going to be proposals, there's going to be things that come up, and you're going to go, to use the baseball analogy, you're probably going to go up to the plate and you're going to strike out 19 out of 20
Of course,
times.
yeah.
And you will hear the most about the 19 times you strike out. But that one win can really bring some great benefit to the county. AmeriClaw is a recent example. So they've brought tax base, they've brought jobs, they've water revenue, and those things are, that's usually something you can count on in the long term. It would help to diversify your economic, your companies in the county, so that if something happens to one particular sector, you're not completely out of the game as far as employment and tax base. So that's something that it's spearheaded by an individual that can dedicate their time to it, would be a vast improvement over myself. And I think in the long run, you will find great advantage to the county. I was somewhat surprised when I pulled the information from our tax department that only 7% of our properties are industrial. I didn't expect it to be a huge number, but that's generally where you have your highest yield on your taxes is in industrial properties, and I'd like to see that number.
And it's going to take a little creativity, right, to be able to attract people that
We're going to have
can work
to
within the
probably work a little
confines.
harder.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we have some things that are, we have land, we have some utilities, we have some gas limitations through part of the county, but we don't have the competitive advantage that some of our surrounding counties do. But there is great competition out there.
Yes, yeah.
And I would like to be in that competition, and unfortunately,
We're not.
I'm not going to be able to do it by myself. And if we could have someone to spearhead those efforts and communicate with existing businesses, and fill their needs, and work as a liaison between the local government and the employers, I think we'll go a long way for the long-term economic outlook for the county. And also, at least initially, I know folks with the TDA have proposed someone to direct their efforts. I see no reason, at least initially, that this person can't split some of those duties as we start to get our TDA more on sound footing, and get our economic development efforts on more sound footing. We can split those duties, and then maybe eventually, if success breeds success, then perhaps there's a segregation down the road. But at least initially, I would like to see those duties shared among one individual.
I saw that in here, so I thought I think that's a good way to kill
And
two birds
there's,
with one stone. You might say so initially, until
Yeah.
we can see. But tourism too, treating it as an economic developer. How do we grow economically through what we can do
it's
from
part of it.
tourism?
It's part of the total economic development package: tourism, industrial, small business. There's lots of moving parts to economic development, but someone dedicated to that would probably serve us well.
Perfect. All right, check. Questions? Anybody else? Let's see where.
So I tried to put as many pictures in there as possible, because I was growing up, I was the kind of person, I like the pictures in the book, more so than the text. But page 10 sort of shows you a snapshot of those revenues that are coming in from your taxes, sales taxes and other fees. Where's it going? Well, about a quarter of it goes to education, not quite a quarter of that goes to human services, and the same for public safety. I will mention that education, there's additional expenditures that are not captured necessarily and categorized as education. I think some debt service for schools is not classified as education, and in particular the newest debt service for the Montgomery Central High School project is not counted in the education expenditure. So actually education is a little bit more than that when you take into account the debt service. Did I say that right, CD?
Probably $4 million.
Yeah, about approximately $4 million more for education. And again, page 11, I tried to break it out by department. A year from now, I'll be able to show you more of a comparison. It would be unfair to show a comparison last year to this year because of the way I allocate things across departments and funds. I'll be happy to explain that in more detail if anyone wants to. I think current budget, a lot of things are centralized. I've tried to spread them out across the departments. It's just easier for me to run reports on them, but looking at the grand total would be the best comparison.
And Frankie, when we do a budget looking at personnel cost,
Mhm.
we estimate it out for all positions being filled, correct? Okay.
Yeah, I do not.
I know they're not, but we
Right.
cost it out for.
Yeah, I assume full employment 100% throughout the year. Obviously, in today's employee market, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But that is well, the alternative is if you gain full employment the whole year, you're going to be in a financial pickle.
If you don't
at the end
plan
of
for,
the year.
yes, okay.
And, lapse salaries, some people look at it as savings. That's not always the case. Some of our positions are reimbursable positions, so if we don't have someone in the seat, it's not coming in on the revenue side as well. So,
I assumed you did that, but I'm just checking.
yep, it's, I've always throughout my career budgeted 100% for our people because we are people heavy and need to make sure we've accounted for those folks appropriately. And we have several funds that are outlined here. We only have 2 funds that have full-time employees. And that would be our primary government services fund and then our water and sewer enterprise. There's about 15 full-timers in the water and sewer side and a few part-timers. So you can see the overwhelming majority of our employees are on the primary government services side across all those functions. Does anybody have any last minute questions about the primary government services fund? If not, I'll move on to our public utilities, and we have 2 funds that will classify under our public utilities. And that's the operations fund for water and sewer. That budget is just shy of $4.1 million. And as I mentioned, that's it's about 15 employees, if I'm not mistaken, and some part-time folks. Debt service is a big portion of the expenses in that fund. Obviously, our water and sewer system is capital intensive, so you can expect to have debt service being a major expenditure. The total fund is up slightly, a little over $50,000, and that's from, I'll call it some natural growth in our adding water and sewer accounts. Some increased usage in some of our bulk customers. So that's a positive sign, and as a result, we can leave the rates, or I'm recommending we leave the rates as they are for the coming year. Now, I will say that, you know, there are lots of things in the water and sewer system. We have a big system as far as the miles of lines, particularly for water. And you know, some of those lines are decades old, and some of our pumping stations and water plant, you know, time is our enemy, and so we're going to have some capital improvements coming down the road. Hopefully we can minimize any impact to our rates down the road, but keep in mind we do have a lot of capital needs, as do almost any local government that's had a water system for any time now. They're experiencing some of those same cost pressures. In addition to the operations of water and sewer, we have a fund for water and sewer projects, and we have several ongoing projects, and CD provides an update on those projects each month in your council packet. And I thought I would just summarize those ongoing projects and their total cost, which is just shy of $7 million. And these are projects that hopefully won't recur, but are actually ongoing. A couple of them are close to being finished, but still 6.8 million is a lot in capital improvements on a $4 million operating budget. Some of these funds are, these projects are supported by grants and loans, and then some of our own money. Did I miss anything, CD?
You're right.
Mount Gilead merger study, what's that on? Is that on the wastewater side?
I believe it is. We're
Yeah.
heavily dependent on the town of Mount Gilead for sewer treatment and for helping ease some of the growth pressures we're experiencing on the western side of the county. Mount Gilead, there are some limitations in conveyance and treatment for Mount Gilead. Not that they're overflowing or anything, but when you obligate flows and you have infrastructure that was designed for less, well, it's growing pains.
Well, yeah, based on how many potential home sites that could be used in that. I think Eric spoke to that too during our budget session.
And the calculation for obligating your flow or obligating your sewer capacity is much greater than what's actually tributary. When a home is built, for example, let's say it uses 100 gallons a day. Well, if it's a 3-bedroom home, when you allocate flow to it, you have to allocate it at 120 gallons per day per bedroom. So everything that's approved is impacting your capacity greater than, generally greater than what's actually tributary to your system. Now, the county owns no treatment facilities, so we depend on cooperation with towns for treatment. The county does have some lines that we convey sewer, but no treatment facilities. And treatment facilities are very, very expensive these days.
All right.
Any other questions about the water and sewer operations or project fund for water and sewer? Well, I'll move on to, we have several other funds, I'll call them. CD's probably got a different name for some of them, but I call them other funds. And these are funds that generally don't have employees. Sometimes the revenue it comes and goes, but nevertheless, they will be part of our budget ordinance. Before I go any further, there are some funds that the county has that are not listed in here. And we'll talk about them if you want to, but they're what's called trust and agency funds. And the county is really acting as a trustee for someone, or we're acting as an agent for someone, like a town, for example. We're collecting their taxes, tax money just comes to us and we write it
Yeah.
back out to them. Since there's not a lot of involvement, I did not really, you don't even have to budget for them, I don't think, if I remember the law correctly, because it's usually not our money.
It's just you just sort of handling role.
Right, we handle the money as a trustee or an agent. Let's see, our trust accounts would be like the jail, folks that are incarcerated that we are managing something on their behalf. I know our agent funds we'll list these in our budget ordinance, but there's not a lot of action, legislative action required, let's put it that way. So among our other funds, fire tax districts, that is, we have three, Baden Lake, Lake Tillery, and Wakeville, where the Board of Commissioners acts as the board for that district and levies taxes across that district in support of fire service. Baden Lake has our largest district as it relates to the base, nearly 800 million in value. That's pretty impressive, to be honest with you. And they have a tax rate of 5.5 cents. So we're levying a property tax about $430,000 or so dollars for Baden Lake. Lake Tillery has a 4-cent tax rate on nearly 600 million in tax base, and that equals about $235,000 annually that we levy for that fire district. And then Wadeville has currently has a 1-cent levy on about 200 million in tax base. I will mention that Wadeville has asked to increase their rate from 1 cent to 2.5 cents, which will yield a total levy of about $52,000 or so dollars. Wadeville also in our budget, we're going to give every fire department in the county $35,000 to support operations and maintenance of county vehicles and things like that. Wadeville we've allocated $35,000 to Wadeville, but with an agreement with the county a couple years ago to buy some air packs for Wadeville, the county went ahead and financed those air packs, and Wade was paying us back at $20,000 per year over 5 years. So I believe there's 4 more years of that repayment schedule. So actually they'll receive $15,000 from the county this year. And in support of their request for an increase in their rate for their district, they're going to put that towards building and building safety improvements. It's about $150,000 project, and that was their intent for the increase in the tax rate. I'll do my best to answer any questions about that. I did have the opportunity to meet with the chief and a
That's
couple other folks.
That's above their 2 cent that we collect too, right? I mean, they get 2 cent, or the 2 cent is levied plus this 1/4% or whatever.
We levy currently a penny, and then they're requesting an additional $0.015 for 2.5 cent total. So they're getting, right now, that penny roughly gets them about $21,000 annually.
That's what we raise though,
That's what we.
their fire tax, personal fire tax.
That's correct, yeah. So
But
about
they
20
still get, I mean, we still get the 2 cent from their,
Yes.
their
So,
area, I
yeah,
guess. I was
yeah.
trying to.
So it's in
district.
addition to any levy that the county has countywide. So in North Carolina, you pay a tax, no matter how many districts you find yourself in, you pay a tax for each individual district. So folks in Wadeville or Lake Tillery or Bay Lake find themselves in two districts,
Mhm.
the county and a fire district, so they have to pay a tax for both.
Kind of like the towns are having to do.
Correct, yep. If you're in a town, you're in the town district and the county district, so you have to pay them both. It may vary slightly from state to state, particularly some states that they call home rule states, where towns and counties have more autonomy.
Mhm.
But North Carolina, if you're in 10 different districts, you're gonna pay 10 different taxes.
Will they have a public hearing on that?
We will,
We will, that's what I meant,
Yeah.
yeah.
yep. So we will have a public hearing, well, for all of our budgetary items at the next meeting.
But won't we have one separate for them for this tax increase, or?
Is that how we've done it in the past?
I'm not sure, but I think that's the way it was.
Last year was the first year they had that, they got
That
that
one.
1 cent.
Okay, I mean, we didn't advertise it that way. It was just a general budget hearing, public hearing on the budget, which this will be part of it. That tax will be levied at the same time we adopt the budget and levy taxes
Mhm.
everywhere else. So there will be a public hearing, and anyone that wishes to talk about that can talk
That
about it.
particular item.
Yep, absolutely.
I was thinking that once we, if their tax rate was gonna go up, you give those people in that area a chance to speak. But if they gonna have a chance to speak on anything in the
Yeah,
budget, I
they
guess
can
that would
absolutely speak on that. Yes, sir.
Because they had it on the ballot. They had to get it on the ballot
Right.
to start it.
Well, Baden and Lake Tillery, they were already on
Yeah,
there,
Lake
so-
Tillery and Baden's been on it for several years. But Wadeville had to put it on the ballot, and the citizens in that district had to vote on that 1 cent last year to get it started.
Okay.
But I think if they're going, Baden and
That's
Lake
why I was
Tillery-
wondering if they had to, if the people in that district would have to do anything if they raised it this year.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is just like
I mean,
Lake
that's-
Tillery and Baden, if they wanted to raise their rate to 5 cents, then I thought they would have
Can they
to.
just raise it like that without having to take a vote or anything from the people in that
I'll
district?
double check.
Yeah. But it may be like you were saying, that they can cover it once anything in the budget that anybody wants to talk about.
It depends on that referendum, did it authorize a district or did it authorize a rate? But we'll double check.
Yeah, I'm not positive exactly how that fell out.
Some of those people don't have a time paying anyway, aren't they?
And the Wadeville district does impact some industry. Jordan, Unilin, McCrae's.
See, I didn't think they might catch it this way if you just said, this is the budget and this, somebody didn't know it, but if those people are sent some kind of notice saying, hey, they're possibly gonna increase the tax rate in your district there, they might wanna come then, so I'm not sure, but if you can check on that, to be sure,
Because I
I'll
bet
do
they
that.
don't know about it.
give them a chance to.
Any other questions about the fire tax districts? So I'll run through some of our other funds really quickly. The property tax revaluation fund, the county is required to put aside enough money every year so that when property revaluation comes up every 8 years, we have enough money to pay for the appraisal of the property, which is one of the county's responsibilities in North Carolina.
Is that some of that money we can invest?
It's invested. It's
That's what I
not-
meant.
Yeah, that fund is relatively small in comparison, but I don't know, CD, what's in there, 300,000 or 400,000-ish?
You're right there.
Yeah. So there is a contribution into that fund of $100,000 in the coming year, and that comes from our primary government services fund, and then we transfer it over so that come 8 years from, or 6 years from now, when we revalue again, we've got money to pay for it. That's fairly standard practice across all counties. Federal forfeitures and state-controlled substance abuse, this is usually related to law enforcement, some seizures through cooperation with state or federal investigations. There's not a lot of money that goes in and out of this, but nevertheless, we will anticipate that we may get some.
Mhm.
So there's a $6,000 budget, and generally those monies, those that we can keep, we have to turn around and put towards additional law enforcement or public safety purposes. The fire truck and fire support fund. This year, we're going to put $650,000 out of our primary government services fund into this fund. Of that, $350,000 will go to the departments. I previously mentioned that that supports their operations and maintenance on vehicles and radio purchases and things like that. The balance of that, roughly $300,000, is estimated to go back into the fund to support future expenditures, should be for fire trucks. And we've got a few years before we are scheduled to purchase another truck, so we'll be able to build some funds there. But we just did some backup napkin actuarial math the other day. Eventually, the county's going to have to put some more money into the fund. What did we say? About 10 years?
I was thinking Matthew said about 15, somewhere there, we was gonna start running.
Once we have to start buying trucks again, I believe we only had 10 years. And it starts sinking once we start buying trucks. So at some point, there should be some consideration into additional funding for fire truck and fire support.
Now, shouldn't that amount go up to 650, or is that just what's coming in this year because of the property reval?
That's,
2 cent?
It's actually just taking the same amount that was appropriated in the current year and bringing it forward this year. So the difference in the current year and next year is this year we actually had to pay for a fire truck. So we're not gonna have any money going into the fund this year. But next year, after we provide support to the fire department, we will have $300,000 that will go back into the fund to support a purchase down the road.
I guess-
That would be the amount's the same, the expenditure's the difference.
Right.
I guess the part I'm talking about is, it's a dedicated 2 cent.
Frankie, history, we had 2 cents that was allocated to the fire department, but Matthew got rid of that last year, I think, was maybe the first year,
Mhm.
it went to $650,000 flat. And all the fire departments agreed to that. This might be the second or third year, I can't remember, but that's 2 cents is old terminology now.
Yeah, I didn't quite remember it that way, but,
Yes.
because really and truly, that's what I've been fussing about all the years, is they slipped that 2 cent fire tax. When you're living in the town, you don't need that fire tax. You've already got the towns covering you. But the county slipped that 2 cent, raising your tax 2 more cents. All the town people had to pay. Now the county people, yeah, they need a little fire protection, but, so yeah, I thought that money was still, like if the property valuation went up, that 2 cent was still dedicated over there.
Mm.
We were doing it just like the 5 cents we did for education. We had 2
Okay.
cents for fire support, but we're not.
Which one was the last one we got the fire truck? Do you remember?
Mount Gilead.
Candor, wasn't it? Well, Mount Gilead and Candor, I can't remember which one came
Candor
last.
used some of their funding for the station.
They did use
Maybe-
it. I
I
think,
may be wrong, but I thought that was.
I think prior year though, they got one, and then Mount Gilead may have got the last one.
I believe Mount Gilead got the most recent one.
So it must have been Mount Gilead, Candor, and then, like you say, they built that fire station. And
So it's not 2 cent.
Yeah, correct.
But it's close. But 650,000, again, the same appropriation. It's just, we will be able to put about 300,000 of that back into the fund for later days. But it's going to require eventually more than that. and maybe we can ease into it.
And I think we need to look back at that, because as property taxes increase, you would get more money going into that fund that was what it was allocated for when the taxpayers were
That's
hit
correct.
with it.
Yeah, if it were,
I mean, I don't know
if
how
it were
much.
2 cent, it would be close to 700,000.
Right, so you would actually be building that fund rather than taking it away.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
I don't
I
understand.
will point it out that eventually we're gonna have to take up additional funding because it will start to sink
Now,
eventually.
but you might, if you use that money over there, you might not have to sink as much. I'm not very much on the budget, but I do understand a little bit about what it was.
Yeah. So, back to the return on investments. I don't think the balance in the fund is gonna make up the difference.
Right.
Well, at least in the short term, I don't see, well, I remember 4 and 5% interest rates in my career. Maybe we see it, I just don't see it in the near future. So the returns aren't gonna, the fund's not gonna grow
You're right.
with investment returns. I lost my page, hang on just a second. Any other questions about the fire truck or the fire support fund? So court facilities, the county receives some funds from the state because we're hosting district and superior court. And some of the fees that litigants or defendants pay comes back to the county to support the maintenance and operations of court facilities. Next year, we're anticipating about $42,000 that we'll be able to receive and utilize in our court facilities fund. And I believe most, if not of that, if not all of it, is transferred to our primary government services fund, because that's where our folks are that maintain and expenditures come out of. So our recreation support fund, this is one we talked about a bit a couple weeks ago. This is a fund that was set up to account for monies from the landfill franchise agreement, and we get just shy of $100,000. We're estimating about $97,000 next year. And I think there's been a mix of distributions in the past, but in recent years, it's mostly went towards athletic teams. And I believe in the last year, we only gave out about 10% of the money. So I mentioned in our last meeting that our municipalities, back to the equity and taxation, our municipalities provide most all of recreation in the county, although the entire county benefits from it. So it'd be my recommendation that we put at least a portion of that funding directly to our municipalities who have the facilities and have the programs that could reach more folks than we're probably able to reach directly ourselves. But again, it's about $97,000 in the coming year, and that number will adjust annually by an inflationary factor. So that's about what you'll look at each year. I have met with some of the towns and discussed, what could they use the monies for, and could it enhance your programs, not just bring money in so you can move it somewhere else, but what can it do to enhance your programs? And that's what I personally would like to see if we were to allocate some to the towns, is what extra can you do? Can you do something more, a different facility in upkeep, or step up your upkeep or capital replacement, or what program, or can you reduce fees on our county residents, something to that effect. But
So did
certainly
we,
open to suggestion, but that's a thought that I had.
I know we talked about it a lot. Did
Yeah.
we, did we land, I mean, what is your proposal other than the $10,000 and then based on what their population would be. Did you run those numbers to see what that would look like per town?
I've got the numbers, bear with me just a second. I think I do anyway.
Well, like I say, you was talking about, last year we only spent a portion, that was because we didn't give the big chunk of money to the golf course last year, I guess. I don't think we did that last year, maybe the year before, I don't know.
I don't think we allocated it to the towns the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So-
I've got a
The
breakdown
last
somewhere.
time they did it was when, like I say, Matthew give it to the mayors to come up with a plan. The mayors came up, appointed Jimmy Blake. Jimmy Blake made the recommendation that they give the 50 to the Troy for the golf course again. And Matthew said, that's it, you know, that we're not gonna continue to go that road. It was $150,000. So the other towns really, they were left out, basically.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So,
So the money that we have not allocated for the past 2 years, what happens to that?
It,
it's just in that
falls-
fund.
It falls back to the fund.
So it's there, it's
So
still
there's a
there.
balance, yeah.
So it should be a pretty sizable,
Few $100,000.
yeah, okay, so it's there, so.
So it could be that the towns that got left out, especially the two smaller ones, could be, because like I say, Star don't have much at their part. We could actually, in my opinion, award them a lump sum to buy a nice piece of equipment. Those things are like $40,000 or $50,000
Yeah,
for
they're not cheap.
nothing hardly when you start buying it. But,
So the population is not set in stone because of the census, but
I'm sure it's
If
pretty
you-
darn close.
yeah, if you took all the money and you divided it based on this suggested formula, obviously the town of Troy with a greater population would get more. Under that, town of Troy would get 28,900. That's taking a flat amount and then the difference based on population. So the theory is there's a flat amount because it costs the same to repair or buy playground equipment or bench, whether you're in Cantor or Troy.
Mhm.
The greater the population, generally the more participation in your programs. So that would support increased funding based on population for those with a greater population. So in this case, Troy with the greater population would have an estimate of about 28,900. And then we've got, it's like Candor, maybe with the smallest population, would get 15,200. So, of course, the formula can be tweaked any way you want to. I was trying to find as much equity as possible.
So if we went this route, and then Mike, this suggestion of taking money from the fund that exists to maybe give to somebody that was left out in the past, that could be something that is a budget adjust
Yeah.
later, right? So if we decide, if Star comes up with a plan and says, hey, we would like to be able to do this in our park, potentially they could come before the board, make a request for that, and we could look at it of dollars that are sitting there in that fund. Is that a possibility?
That's certainly a possibility. In fact,
Because they need a strategy, right? What would they even
They need to
do?
know.
I was thinking
What
like a
they wanna do with
matching,
it.
say like if they said, we're gonna spend
Yes.
$20,000, county would match you with
Yeah,
20,000.
so I think that can be
Yeah.
something we look to use if those dollars aren't used somewhere else that are sitting in this recreation
Right.
fund that haven't been used in the past. That's something I think we could look at a little differently than just this allocation here to go, hey, decide what that needs to be and then come make that presentation, because I think that would be,
So many grants on the recreation
Mhm.
side now require that the applicant have a master plan
mhm,
for recreation. I know I worked with the town of Candor briefly on a proposal, and they have a plan
Mhm.
in place, and I think they attempted perhaps some grant opportunities, but have struck out so far. But one possibility that I believe was suggested some time ago and discussed was, for our towns that maybe are applying for a grant, that the county could maybe foot some of the match for them to relieve some of the burden. So that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I
Well, that's,
like
you know,
that.
like, if we meet, you know, with the mayors and find out, like I say, what they have and what their thoughts are, is gonna be.
And the numbers I gave you would be dividing the entire allocation. In recent years, most of our funding has went to individual, looks like mostly youth sports.
So this does not incorporate taking those dollars that we
No, it
used to
would.
give,
Well, the numbers I gave you would be dividing the total up.
but we would want to still give money
If
to
you,
the,
yes, if you wanted to do that, then
these would
we
drop a
it
little
changed
bit.
the numbers.
Yeah.
So that's entirely up to the board.
But you're proposing to give that responsibility to the towns for those programs instead of it running through the county?
Yes, to provide support to the towns who, well, let's face it, most of those programs are ran through a town's facility.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether the town actually coordinates it or the picking up the teams and paying for the officials or not, most of our recreational, sports activities are ran through a town facility. Now, there's more to recreation than just team sports.
Right, right.
But that just happens to be the way we've allocated the funds in the last few years.
Well, I don't know, I just know there's a lot of different opinions on how to use that, and like I say, it's just kinda hard to do it right now, I think, you know, because we don't really know. Just
Yeah.
like the swimming stuff, you know, we talked about. It's just kinda hard, and but anyway.
The way to reach most of your people is through the towns. Because we don't have a single recreation staff member. We don't have much in the way of recreational opportunities, facilities, that is.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
And the towns do that.
Yes.
They do have recreational personnel and are looking at their recreation area. So I think that's a good idea, is to let them facilitate that.
mhm. I support that, at least this year, to see, you know, let's see how it, knowing that, we know that BISCO is placing a recreation person on staff. I know the town of Troy is putting through a fellows program, but a recreation person for the next year. But I like the approach of these dollars being allocated, but then some of these smaller towns that may not have great areas, such as a Star and a Candor, if they put together a recreation plan or a parks plan, then they could come and we could maybe help, you know, work
Well,
with
Star,
that.
when the commissioners did ask, he called and asked me about them getting some funding. for
Yeah.
Yes,
And
recreation.
so they
are
would,
looking for
yes, they
that.
are, yeah. So they would get this, and then if they needed bigger equipment, something else, they could come and we could look at.
Because they're struggling because they didn't get an allocation for
Right.
those years.
Yes.
Well, Troy's got some nice new equipment down there at the, what is that, Low Warner Park?
Back behind
Dozier
Blair,
Field
yeah,
or whatever
Dozier
it
Field
is.
and Shelby Brown. Selby
Yeah, I
Brown.
saw it when I came by the other day. I thought, man, look at that.
It's
Well,
pretty, it's nice.
The thing
down
about
there.
it, it's not town funded. You know, those are private funds that did all of that, so.
Yeah, I kind of wondered if it wasn't. I thought,
That's
boy, that'd be
right.
nice for the kids when they have the concerts. They can go over there and play.
Absolutely, right. It's gonna be nice.
I guess one of the things I worry about is when you put that money in the budget, covers grass cutting, which covers, you know, all the stuff that's really not really recreation, is to provide, you know, to keep the recreation park clean,
But it is, because they don't have the money to keep up the facilities. And
Right.
if the facilities are not usable, then,
Yeah,
I mean, it's just sitting there. It's like having any other building or facility that's not used or maintained. It goes down until it's not usable at all, and then it's a greater investment to try and bring it back. So I think,
but that should be the town's part. I mean, like I say, you can go either way, but I just know how budgets work on the town, and like I say, when they put that money in there, it covers you know, whatever you want to.
So they'll use it for mowing and stuff instead of letting the town
Ex-
maintenance do it.
Yeah, I mean, they can use, yeah. They could say, well, we got that extra money in here, we can put 5,000 more over here to this budget
That's why they
this
probably
year.
need to come up with a master plan.
Well, or, you know, I didn't propose a formal agreement with the towns to say, hey, you can't use this to backfill, you know, a
Right.
budget shortfall. It needs to be used to enhance your program, and what are you gonna do to enhance it? And you know,
Yeah, I mean,
file
that's-
a report and show what you did.
I
We
think-
can go that far.
Well, I know it's a lot more trouble, but I'm just saying, that's, like I say, I've been on the town board and I've seen how the budgets work, just like they're working here with the fire tax stuff.
I hope no one is counting on this money, so
No.
if it does happen, it can be something extra they do for our citizens.
I don't think they would be counting on it since they haven't gotten it in a few
Right.
years. I don't
Right.
think anybody is thinking they're getting that money.
The one concern I do have is the transition for some of our youth sports teams, particularly that have counted on some of the support. So I really have mixed feelings about that, because there's probably some that may be counting on it for fall
Right, they
sports,
probably
for
are.
example.
And Misty, again, how much was it? You told us this
I
number.
give 10,000 out in the fall and 10,000.
Just
spring.
total, so that's
total
$20,000 out of
Yes.
this, out of the 97,000.
And due to COVID, we only paid out one season this
Right.
past year, so a little less than normal.
But I think when we were in our work session, didn't we agree that we still wanted the sports program, that payout to be done? Did we say that? I don't remember.
We talked about it going both ways.
I know, I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, you could approach it with a hybrid approach. You know, just saying that
I just hate that you have to be in it.
77,000 is for, divide amongst our towns, and the 20 is for the sports teams, and there really is flexibility.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. Why is this the hardest piece of our budget? So this has been the hardest thing we
Yeah,
spent more time on.
and actually, it shouldn't be hard because it's free money. We could just say, hey, bam, you know, send it out, but.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess, you know, the good thing is, this is 1 year, right? We're just saying this for 1 year. So why not put that responsibility over to the towns and trust, you know, if we say this is what this is for, give them the opportunity to prove good stewardship with that money and doing great things. Because I think COVID really pointed out the need for recreation, outdoor thing. I mean, we've seen that ramp up across the board. So, I mean, obviously, it's all of us collectively, but I'm going, it's 1 year. If they squander it the wrong way, you know, hate to say that, because I don't think anybody intentionally wouldn't use it, you know, to do some good things from a recreation standpoint, but
The only
we can always
thing-
next year go, yep, we ain't doing that.
Well, I think that's where we've been, but I don't, it's not that I don't trust them. It's just I know how easy it is to
I-
slip money over here, and you've been putting $10,000 in budget for the towns. They've been budgeting 10,000. They say, well, we got 20,000 from the county. We don't need the budget. We need this money over here to buy, we need to buy, police uniforms or whatever they want to buy. So that's
Yeah.
just where I just see the little bit of, and I know it's more trouble if we keep
Yeah.
our hands on it.
Yeah, I don't
But we
have
got
that
Frankie, that's,
responsibility.
you know, we don't have to worry about keeping much hands on it. We got
As long as
Frankie.
Frank keeps his hands on it,
Some of the,
between him and the
Don't we,
CD.
Frankie? We got you, don't we?
I will do my best.
some
But
of the youth sports incorporate kids from multi-towns.
Yes.
So that might be a little bit difficult to figure out and navigate there as well, because they're not tied to one town. Like, I think the girls softball league is the whole county coming to Troy to play.
Mhm.
Well, y'all shouldn't make it so
And
difficult.
soccer.
I'm trying not to.
Well, Frankie, move on. We were tired of that one. We will know on something else.
All right. Some of the other funds, the Haltawanger Retreat Fund, Obviously, that was part of the Haltiwanger property. And just a little quick update on that. We received the deed from Pfeiffer. Should be recording that very, very soon, which will pave the way for us to sell the properties as a whole, which I believe will make them more marketable. And then, of course, we've got the agreement to split the proceeds with Pfeiffer. So I would hope that we don't have to spend money out of this fund or much for the maintenance, that once the property is disposed of, that expense will come off of us. But nevertheless, I've prepared us in case we are still owners with a $16,000 appropriation that I believe covers basic maintenance and some utilities. Emergency telephone fund, this is the fund from the NC 911 board that we receive funds each year that we can use for certain expenses related to the county being a primary, a public safety access point, I believe is what PSAP means. So we do the dispatching for the entire county, and we are considered a PSAP. And I believe that money is based on a 5-year average of expenditures. And this year we're expecting to receive $156,000 or so dollars, which is actually a slight, it's a decrease from prior years, which again is based on that rolling average, 5-year average for the county. Is that right, CD? Did I say that right? But we will use those funds towards some equipment maintenance and phone telecommunication services and some licensing of our software. Emergency Management Performance Grant, this is funding that we receive, and we expect to receive about $40,000 next year, and it's a preparedness grant and emergency management for all hazards. Robbie takes care of that program, and we are required to, or have chosen to account for those funds in a separate fund rather than run them through our primary government services fund. So again, it's about $40,000 we expect to receive next year. Child support incentives is funds we receive from, I'm going to say, the federal government, and then by way of the state, based on our performance in the collection of child support. And those monies will vary from year to year, and we expect about a little over $30,000 next year. And our Educational Facilities Maintenance Projects Fund, I briefly mentioned that earlier, where 1 cent of our tax levy goes there, in addition to part of our sales tax funds go into that fund to support the maintenance of our school facilities. And then we also have a Educational Facilities Capital Projects Fund, and that's where 4 cents of our tax levy goes. And I will note that this fund will start operating, I'm gonna call it a sinking fund for lack of a better word, but we're gonna be paying debt payments for the new high school out of this fund and the current and previous contributions to the fund, rather than our primary government services fund. And that's intended to be a bridge until other debt elapses in our primary government services fund. So should be in, was it 2026, when the other debt expires, and the contributions that are going into the fund and in combination with that expiring debt will be enough to cover the debt service on the high school project. So that's how that's paid for. Clear as mud.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So, in other words, we have money in the fund, we're gonna spend it down. And the amount we're putting in the fund combined with how much is in the fund will get us by until 2026. And then
When those other things are
then
paid
the other
off.
things are paid for, we can take the money from those things we were paying for and then the money we're putting aside each year on a recurring basis, and it will be enough to pay.
And so originally, when we did the debt, right, it was about a $3 million a year payment, right? And then with new financing, it took it down to about $2.5 million.
Mhm.
So we got $500,000 extra that we are close. We had planned for, right, in that
Correct.
fund,
Yep.
that now we're gonna benefit a little bit.
Yep.
So over the next 5 years, that's,
Yep, it helps.
yeah,
We can buy more time out of
Right.
this fund because of the reduction in
yeah.
the interest rate and thus the payment. And I believe CD has just started putting an analysis in our monthly
Mhm.
report that sort of forecasts this fund and where it will stand in 2026. Did I see that right, or did I dream that?
No, you're right.
I thought I saw that too.
So, barring some major change in our tax rate base or funding stream, we should be good.
Good.
And then the final fund I'll just mention briefly is the Airport and County Projects Fund. This is mostly for capital projects, for county buildings and the airport. Really, it's two funds, but I combine them together because in the coming year, there's only a contribution to one of the funds rather than expenses coming from the funds. There's a contribution of $100,000 into the county projects fund. So this is a separate set of books that we account for current and upcoming projects that may be of significant expense. There's one that comes to mind that will probably touch this fund, and that would be the courthouse. I believe there was a study conducted a few years ago on the condition and some recommendations. And our courthouse is, what, 100 years old? And I'm sure it's seen several episodes of expansion and reconstruction and deconstruction. But that's probably, if my crystal ball is a little clear, the next big project that the county will have to consider.
Mhm.
As I believe the third floor is not even used. So that's a big project. CD, was that $5 million for a renovation project? And that was
I'm not reporting.
a few years ago, so it's double now, I'm sure. So that's a big project on the horizon that we need to keep in mind.
Well, we're talking capital projects, so the old First Bank building,
Mhm.
how much of that is utilized? I mean, I knew back when I read a number of plans of things that were gonna move into that building so that the courthouse could be remodeled, certain pieces. I don't know that that was ever done, but what percentage of that?
I can't answer that, but I'll find an answer
Yeah, I just
for you.
wonder, what capacity is there, and that's a space that,
It was mainly the probation and parole departments that were moved.
yeah, I knew that's what was moved, but when I read through budget letters from, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I mean, it laid out a strategy of what was gonna shift to different places so the courthouse could go through certain renovations, so this was gonna shift here and do this and that was actually laid out in the budget letter, but, those things obviously we weren't able to do, so, but just wondering what we utilize.
I think it was because the expenses for the courthouse renovations amounted to more than
Maybe so, I don't know.
anticipated.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's a big building over there, just wondering what we,
Mhm. I'll have to,
I mean,
Get a
it's not a
better
dire
answer.
need, I know, I see the things that are currently over there, but the rest of that building, do we even have any plan of attack of what we're gonna utilize that for?
well, it would, if there is available space, if there was a decision to rehabilitate part of the courthouse, to renovate, it would be, we're gonna have to find somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't know, I haven't traipsed through that building, but, I mean, those are things we all have to look at later and consider. And I guess other capital projects for this year, we will do the things that we're gonna do at
Yeah.
the extension,
So,
agriculture extension office and those things.
Yeah, I failed to mention, in our primary government services fund expenditures, there were a couple projects that were delayed this year. And so I've included those in the proposed budget for next year.
I feel like I read them somewhere, but then I didn't
I-
find
I'm-
them this time.
Yeah, it's
Feel like
mentioned
it.
somewhere in
I
here.
thought I did earlier, like, I think I read
But
that.
I believe it's $450,000, and that was for cooperative extension building,
Mhm.
the roof primarily, and some other improvements, and the roof for
Yes.
this building.
Yeah, okay.
And
So we did build those are here, so that's good.
yeah, I
All
I
right.
sought to make those a priority. Maybe if we get lucky, there's a little money left over and I'm overestimated, and maybe we can hit some of the smaller projects around. I know there were a few that I discussed with individuals that I did not include in here
Mhm.
that we'll probably talk about at some point in the future. I know the carpet in the library is one that we've discussed before. And then some miscellaneous improvements in some of our facilities. But those two main ones that were delayed this year, they are included in the proposed budget.
Anybody have anything else? You, does that about wrap it up?
I talked more than I wanted to. But there's some fee schedule changes in there. There's not a ton. And I think I highlighted those. So if anyone has any questions about our fee schedule, it's not a huge portion of our budget, and it's not touching the water and sewer fees, but there are a few adjustments in there. Be happy to answer any questions regarding those, or any questions you guys have on the presentation here, charts, the text. Coming next will be the budget ordinance, and that it will be adopted on a department basis, in some cases a fund basis, but the meat will be in a department basis, similar to what you see in one of the charts here. So that will explain why it will look a little different upcoming.
Anybody got anything else?
Well, I just want to say, the present, it was awesome. I mean, it was very explanatory, you know, especially first-time budget, to be able to go through and read
Easy
each
to
section
follow.
by section. It was easy to follow, so
Well, good.
you did a great job with that. Thank you.
Thank you
I
very
made it
much.
way easier for me to
Still
comprehend
learning
and
myself.
dissect, so.
Yeah, it's a pretty big budget. You could just imagine how the state and the federal budget, how they, no wonder they can do anything with it. I mean, it's just
Well,
unbelievable.
Too many cooks in the kitchen too, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes it harder.
I will say this is the initial budget
Yes.
proposal. There will be adjustments throughout the year.
Yeah.
If there's not, that will shock me. But based on some of the revenues we receive, some we may not have a good idea,
Mhm.
and we may be pleasantly surprised later in the year. But this will be the start, but I would anticipate we're going to see budget amendments throughout the year.
Well, would someone like to make a motion that we adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn our budget session.
Motion's been made by Commissioner Hassel. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Nobody wants to go home?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Dawson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, thank you, and thank you again.